It all started on a warm summer night in a quiet little town called Cedar Hollow. This town was not very big, but it was known for its farms and gardens. The people who lived there worked hard growing vegetables like tomatoes, squash, and lettuce. Everyone depended on their crops to sell at the market and to feed their families. Joe Weller was one of the farmers. He was a tall man with a kind face, and he loved working on his farm. Every morning he woke up early to check his plants, water them, and make sure they were healthy. His farm was his pride and joy. That summer, the weather had been perfect: sunny days, soft rain, and warm nights. Joe was hopeful for a big harvest. But one morning, something strange happened. Joe went outside before dawn, like he always did, to check on his vegetables. As he walked through his fields, he noticed something was wrong. His tomato plants looked like someone had pulled the ripe tomatoes right off the vines. The leaves were crushed, and there were footprints in the soft soil. Not just one or two tomatoes, dozens were missing. Joe was confused and angry. He thought, "Who would come here at night and steal my hard work?" He looked around for any signs of people, but the fields were empty. The footprints were strange, too big and too wide to be a normal person's. And there was something else: scorch marks on the ground, like small burns. Joe had never seen anything like this before. He ran to his neighbors' farms to see if they had the same problem. To his surprise, many of them had lost vegetables too. Mrs. Thomas's lettuce was gone. Mr. Rivera's squash disappeared. And all of the farmers told similar stories. Something was taking their crops at night and no one knew what it was. The town grew worried. Crops were their main source of money, and if the vegetables kept disappearing, many families would struggle to survive. Some people thought it was wild animals like deer or rabbits, but the marks didn't match any animal tracks they knew. Others guessed it might be teenagers playing pranks, but no one had seen anyone sneaking around. Joe was determined to find out the truth. He decided to stay awake one night to catch whoever was stealing from the farms. He set up a small camp near his tomato patch, bringing a flashlight, some snacks, and his old hunting rifle just in case. The night was quiet and the stars shone brightly above. The air smelled fresh and cool. Hours passed slowly. Joe's eyes grew heavy, but he stayed alert. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a flicker of light. It was strange, like a small greenish glow moving near the edge of the field. Joe stood up quickly, shining his flashlight toward the movement. But the light vanished. His heart beat fast. He thought, maybe it was just a trick of the eyes. But then he noticed something else, strange footprints glowing faintly in the moonlight. Joe followed them carefully. The tracks led toward the hill behind his farm. He wasn't alone anymore. More farmers had heard about the strange thefts and had set up their own watches. They joined Joe near the hill, whispering in confusion and fear. Suddenly, a bright flash lit the sky, and a figure appeared near the hill. A thin, pale creature with large eyes, moving quickly and quietly. The farmers gasped. None of them had ever seen anything like this before. The figure didn't look like a man or a wild animal. It was something else, something they could not explain. The creature reached out and grabbed some vegetables, putting them into a glowing bag. Then, without a sound, it disappeared into the dark forest beyond the hill. Joe and the others stared in shock. Was this an alien? Was it real? No one knew, but one thing was clear. The thief was not human, and this mystery was much bigger than they ever imagined. The next day, the news spread through Cedar Hollow like wildfire. People talked about the strange figure and the glowing lights. Some were scared, some were curious, and others didn't believe the story at all. But the missing vegetables were real and the strange footprints remained. Joe decided he needed to learn more. He began researching strange lights and unexplained events in the area. He talked to scientists and even tried to reach out to the government, but the answers were few and far between. As days went by, the strange thefts continued. More vegetables disappeared, and the creature was seen again and again. The town was on edge, but also fascinated. What was the creature's story? Why was it stealing from their farms? Was it dangerous or just desperate? Joe's mind raced with questions. He wondered if the creature was hungry, scared, or lost. He thought about what he would do if he were in its place. Maybe it was not a thief at all, but a mother trying to feed her children. With that thought, Joe knew he had to be ready for whatever came next. He prepared himself to face the unknown, hoping to protect his farm, but also to understand the strange visitor who had entered their peaceful town. After that first shocking night when Joe and the other farmers saw the strange figure stealing vegetables, the whole town of Cedar Hollow was filled with questions and fear. Everyone wanted to know more about the creature that was sneaking around in the darkness. Who or what was it? Why was it stealing their food? Was it dangerous? Joe was one of the few who didn't just want to guess. He wanted to find the truth, so he took action. The farmers of Cedar Hollow decided they could no longer wait and watch their crops disappear. They needed to catch the thief for good. Joe thought carefully about how to do it. The creature only came out at night, and it was very fast and careful. It didn't make any noise and seemed to know exactly where to go. The farmers needed to be smart. Just sitting out there with flashlights wouldn't work anymore. Joe talked to some of the other farmers who knew about cameras and technology. He learned that they could set up thermal cameras, special devices that can see heat even in total darkness. Animals, humans, or anything warm leaves a heat signature, which these cameras could detect. This was perfect for catching the thief without needing to turn on bright lights that might scare it away. Together, the farmers bought a few thermal cameras and set them up in different parts of the farms, especially near the vegetable patches that had been hit the hardest. Joe also made sure he had a flashlight and his old rifle close by, just in case. The night was long and quiet. Joe stayed awake, sitting near one of the cameras, watching the small screen for any sign of movement. The moon was bright, but the fields were still and silent. Hours passed slowly and Joe's eyes felt heavy, but he was determined. Suddenly, just as the clock neared midnight, the screen on the camera flickered. Joe saw a faint heat shape moving across the field, small, thin, and moving very fast. The shape was different from any human or animal he had ever seen. It seemed to float across the ground, almost like it was gliding. Joe's heart raced. He grabbed his flashlight and shone it toward where the heat shape had been. But the light found nothing but empty space. The figure was gone. Then, out of the dark, the same thin figure appeared, closer this time. Joe could see it more clearly through the night vision on the camera. The creature was small, with long arms and legs. Its skin was pale and almost shiny, under the moonlight. Its eyes were large and dark, reflecting the flashlight beam. The creature moved slowly toward the vegetable patch. Joe watched, frozen but alert. The creature reached out with trembling hands and carefully picked a handful of ripe tomatoes. It placed them in a strange bag that glowed softly in the dark. Joe wanted to call out, but he held his breath. He needed to be sure what was happening. Then, without a sound, the creature turned and disappeared toward the hills behind the farms. Joe could see it vanish into the shadows as if it was swallowed by the night. The other farmers joined Joe near the cameras, watching the screen and whispering nervously. No one said a word. They all saw the same thing, a strange being taking their crops but not destroying anything else. It was careful, almost respectful. The next morning, the news spread quickly. The farmers showed the video footage to the town. People were amazed and frightened. Some thought it was an alien. Others thought it was a new kind of animal, but everyone agreed. This was no ordinary thief. Joe felt a mix of fear and curiosity. He knew he had to find a way to talk to the creature if possible. He wanted to understand why it was stealing the vegetables instead of simply running away. Over. The next few days, Joe and a small group of farmers kept watch every night. They set up more cameras and lights, trying to learn the creature's habits. They noticed it always came at the same time, between midnight and 2 a.m., and it only took fresh vegetables, never damaging the plants or anything else. One night, Joe thought he saw the creature looking at him from a distance. It seemed scared but also tired. Joe lowered his flashlight and didn't move. He hoped the creature would feel less afraid. Slowly, Joe realized that the creature was not dangerous or aggressive. It was desperate. It was searching for something important, something to survive. He remembered the stories of people in need, who had stolen food because they had no other choice. Maybe this creature was the same. Joe's heart softened. Joe started leaving small baskets of vegetables near the edges of the fields, hoping the creature would find them and stop stealing. So secretly, after a few nights, the baskets were empty, but no new damage was done to the crops. This gave Joe hope. Maybe the creature just needed help, not punishment. Meanwhile, the farmers discussed what to do next. Some wanted to call the authorities, fearing the creature might be dangerous. Others wanted to keep it a secret, worried the government would harm the creature. Joe argued for patience and kindness. He said, "We don't know what it wants or why it's here. Maybe it's lost or hurt. We should try to understand it first." The farmers agreed to keep watching quietly and try to help. Then one night, Joe made a plan to follow the creature after it left the fields. He stayed hidden and waited until the creature took the vegetables and disappeared toward the hills. Joe followed carefully, moving quietly through the forest. The moonlight guided his steps, and the night was full of sounds: crickets chirping, leaves rustling in the breeze. After walking for a while, Joe saw the creature again. This time it stopped near a small clearing. Joe hid behind a tree and watched. The creature sat down, placing the glowing bag next to her. Joe noticed that there were smaller shapes near her, small figures moving slowly, their shapes too tiny to be animals. Joe guessed they were children. The creature spoke softly in a strange language Joe didn't understand, but the tone was gentle and loving. Joe's heart ached. He realized this creature was a mother, caring for her children just like any parent would. Joe wanted to help, but also didn't want to scare them away. He decided to return to the town and think about how to approach this carefully. Over the next days, Joe kept the secret of the creature and her children. He shared his discovery only with a few trusted friends. Together, they planned how to help without causing harm. The people of Cedar Hollow were changed by what they had learned. What started as fear and suspicion became understanding and hope. The strange visitor was no longer just a thief. It was a mother fighting to keep her family alive in a world that was not hers. Joe felt a new responsibility. He would protect this family and find a way to help them. No matter what happened, he knew Cedar Hollow's story had become something bigger than just stolen vegetables. It was about kindness, courage, and the power of empathy. And so, every night, Joe and the farmers watched, waited, and hoped for a peaceful way to welcome the desperate mother and her children into their lives. Joe had never imagined that the strange being he had been watching was a mother. When he finally saw her sitting in the small clearing with 3 tiny figures, her children, close by, everything changed. For the first time, he understood that this wasn't just some thief or mysterious creature. This was a desperate mother trying to survive and care for her family in a strange, unfamiliar world. The night air was cool and quiet, filled with the sounds of the forest. Joe stayed hidden behind a large tree, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and compassion. He watched as the mother gently tended to her children, speaking to them softly in a language he couldn't understand, but which sounded full of love and worry. He noticed how tired she looked. Her pale skin glistened faintly in the moonlight, and her large, dark eyes reflected a sadness that Joe had never seen before. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached into the glowing bag and carefully pulled out some of the vegetables she had taken from his farm. One of the children reached out eagerly for a piece of tomato. The mother broke it into small pieces and fed it to them with great care. The children looked weak and thin, but Joe could see that they trusted their mother completely. They were fragile and scared, but also full of hope, because their mother was doing everything she could to protect them. Joe felt a deep wave of sympathy wash over him. He realized this being was not a criminal or a monster. She was just like any mother anywhere, doing whatever it took to keep her children alive. Suddenly, one of the children made a soft, pleading sound. The mother looked down at the child, her eyes filled with pain. Joe wished he could do something to help, but he was still cautious. He didn't want to scare them or make the situation worse. Then, something unexpected happened. The mother noticed Joe. At first, Joe thought she would run away, terrified by the presence of a human. But instead, she stood up slowly and faced him, her large eyes wide with fear and desperation. Joe raised his hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. His voice was soft as he said, "I'm not here to hurt you." The mother took a step back but didn't run. Instead, she dropped to her knees and looked up at Joe with a pleading expression. She spoke broken English, her voice trembling as she said, "Please, don't shoot. My kids haven't eaten in days." Her words hit Joe like a punch to the chest. He could feel her pain and desperation as if it were his own. Here was a mother, lost in an unknown place, without food, without help, struggling to keep her children alive. Joe lowered his rifle slowly. He realized that this was not a situation for violence or fear, but for kindness and understanding. He knelt down a little, trying to show her he was a friend. "I want to help," he said gently. The mother's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, unable to speak much more. Joe spent the next few hours talking to her as best as he could. She told him her name was Syrah. She and her family were not from this world. Their ship had crashed months ago in the forest nearby. Most of her crew had died in the crash, and she was left alone with her children. She explained that her children could not eat Earth's meat or processed foods. Their bodies were different and they could only digest fresh, natural vegetables. That was why she had taken Joe's crops. She was afraid to come near humans, but hunger forced her to steal what she could. Joe listened carefully, his heart breaking for her. He realized that the town's fear and suspicion had been misplaced. This family was not a threat. They were survivors. He promised to help Syrah and her children. But he also knew this would not be easy. The government might get involved, and people might react with fear or anger. He needed to be careful. Over the next few days, Joe kept visiting Syrah and her children. He brought fresh vegetables from his farm and shared stories about life in Cedar Hollow. They communicated as best as they could, using simple words and gestures. The children slowly grew stronger with the food. Their eyes brightened, and they began to play quietly in the clearing. Joe felt a sense of hope growing inside him. However, Joe also knew that the town would need to understand and accept Syrah's family if they were to survive together. He began speaking to some trusted neighbors about the situation, preparing them for the truth. Not everyone was ready to believe Joe's story. Some thought he was crazy or making things up. Others were scared of what an alien family living nearby might mean for their safety. But Joe's calm and honest way of explaining convinced a small group of people to help. They agreed to keep Syrah's secret and support her family. Together, they built a small hidden greenhouse near the crash site. They grew fresh vegetables and shared food with Syrah and her children. They also helped repair parts of the ship that Syrah had salvaged. Life became a quiet, careful balance. Syrah and her children stayed hidden but safe. The farmers watched over them, making sure they had what they needed. Joe felt proud of what the town was doing. Cedar Hollow had chosen kindness over fear. They had opened their hearts to a family from another world. But Joe also knew that this peace might not last forever. The government was already asking questions about strange lights and unusual activity near the forest. There was a risk that the secret would be discovered. Still, Joe hoped that by showing the truth, that Syrah was a desperate mother, not a threat, they could protect her family and teach others the power of compassion. In the quiet moments, Joe would sit by the clearing, watching Syrah's children play. He thought about how different their lives were and how much they all had in common. Mothers and children, no matter where they come from, share the same love and hope. And so, in the heart of Cedar Hollow, a new story was being written. A story of trust, survival, and the courage to care for others even when they are strangers from far beyond the stars. After Joe and the small group of trusted farmers had been secretly helping Syrah and her children for some time, the peaceful life they had built started to face new challenges. At first, everything seemed hopeful. The children were getting stronger, The hidden greenhouse was thriving with fresh vegetables, and Syrah was slowly regaining her strength. But Joe knew deep down that their secret was fragile. It wouldn't take much for things to change. One evening, as Joe was returning from the greenhouse with a basket full of fresh vegetables, he noticed something strange near the edge of the forest. There were footprints, human footprints, and they looked recent. Joe's heart skipped a beat. He knew this meant someone else had come close to the hidden area. But who? And what did they want? Joe hurried back to the town and told his closest friends. They all agreed that they needed to be extra careful. If even one stranger found out about Syrah's family, the whole secret could be ruined. That night, Joe and the other farmers took turns watching the forest. They stayed quiet, hiding behind trees and bushes, waiting to see if anyone else would come. Sure enough, late at night, a small group of people appeared. They were not from Cedar Hollow. They looked like government agents, wearing uniforms and carrying flashlights and radios. Joe's stomach tightened with fear. These people were exactly what he had been worried about. If they discovered Syrah and her children, the government would take them away. Who knew what would happen next? Would they be experimented on, locked up, or worse? Joe quickly ran back to the clearing where Syrah lived. He whispered urgently to her, "They're coming. You need to hide." Syrah's eyes widened in terror. She gathered her children and hid them in a small cave she had found nearby, deep in the woods. Joe and the farmers prepared to protect her as best as they could. They knew they couldn't fight the government, but they could try to delay them. The agents arrived the next day, searching the forest carefully. They used loudspeakers and scanned the area with special equipment. Joe and the farmers kept a safe distance but watched everything closely. The government agents set up camp near the forest edge and called for reinforcements. Joe realized this was serious. If they found Syrah, the family's fate would be in the hands of strangers who might not understand or care about their story. But Joe refused to give up. He started talking to the townspeople more openly, explaining who Syrah and her children were. Some people were afraid, but many others felt compassion. Slowly, the community began to come together, deciding they would protect Syrah no matter what. Joe and the farmers worked quickly to move Syrah's family deeper into the forest to a new hidden shelter they had prepared. It was safer, and it had everything they needed to survive. At the same time, Joe and his friends started talking to local officials. They shared their story, asking for help to keep Syrah safe. Some officials were skeptical, but others were moved by Joe's honesty and the evidence he showed them, the videos, the footprints, and even the vegetables left behind. Meanwhile, Syrah's children were growing stronger and happier in their new home. They played quietly, learning to trust Joe and the farmers who had become their protectors. Joe visited them often, bringing food and supplies. He told them stories about life on Earth, about the stars and the animals, trying to make them feel safe and loved. Despite the danger, Joe believed that if they worked together, they could keep Syrah and her children safe. He saw how the town was changing. Fear was turning into acceptance. People were starting to understand that this was not a story about aliens or monsters. It was a story about family, survival, and hope. But the government's presence grew stronger. More agents arrived, bringing heavy equipment and dogs to search the forest. The secret was at risk. One night, Joe overheard the agents talking about capturing the family to study them. The thought made his blood run cold. He knew they had to act fast. Joe and the farmers decided to send Syrah and her children even farther away, to a place where no one could find them. It was a difficult decision. They would lose sight of them, but it was the only way to keep them safe. With heavy hearts, Joe helped Syrah and her children pack what little they had. They said goodbye to the town they had come to trust and set off into the deeper forest under the cover of darkness. Joe watched them disappear into the shadows, feeling a mix of sadness and hope. He promised himself he would do everything to help them from afar. Back in Cedar Hollow, life returned to a quieter rhythm. The government agents eventually left, unable to find any trace of the mysterious family. Joe continued to tell their story quietly, reminding the town that kindness and courage can protect even the most fragile among us. Syrah and her children's journey was far from over, but thanks to Joe and the farmers, They had a chance to live, to grow, and to one day find a new home where they could be safe and loved. After Syrah and her children vanished deep into the forest guided by Joe and the farmers, life in Cedar Hollow felt different. The town was quieter, but everyone who knew the story carried a sense of hope and worry in their hearts. Joe often sat on his porch at night, staring at the stars and thinking about the family he had helped. He wondered where they were now and if they were safe. The days passed slowly. Joe and the farmers kept in touch as best as they could, sharing news and watching for any sign of trouble. The government agents had left, but their presence had shaken the town. People talked quietly about what had happened, about the alien, mother and her children, about the courage it took to protect them, and about how kindness had won over fear. Joe felt proud of his community, but he also knew that the story wasn't over. The family was still out there somewhere in the vast forest trying to survive in a world that was not made for them. One morning, Joe received a surprising visitor. It was a woman from the nearby city, a scientist named Dr. Emily Carter. She had heard about the strange events in Cedar Hollow and wanted to learn more. But unlike the government agents who had come before, Emily was different. She was kind and curious, not aggressive or afraid. Joe invited Emily to his farm and told her everything: the crash, the stolen vegetables, the secret help the town had, given to Syrah and her children. Emily listened carefully. She said she believed they could help the family in a better way. She wanted to find them, not to capture or study them against their will, but to offer support and protection. Joe was cautious. He didn't want Syrah and her children to be found by strangers who might harm them, but Emily promised she would respect their wishes and only help if the family agreed. Together, Joe and Emily planned carefully. They decided to look for signs of the family in the forest, but only to make contact and offer friendship. They gathered a small team of trusted people from Cedar Hollow, and with careful preparation they set out into the woods. The forest was dense and quiet, filled with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. Joe and Emily moved slowly, searching for any sign of the family. After days of searching, they found a small hidden shelter deep among the trees. It was simple but well made, surrounded by plants and fresh water. Joe's heart pounded as they approached quietly. Suddenly, Syrah appeared with her children. They looked thinner than before, but there was a calmness in their eyes. Syrah stared at the visitors with caution, but Joe stepped forward and spoke gently. "We are friends. We want to help," he said. Syrah's children peeked from behind, her curious but shy. Emily stepped forward slowly, showing a small basket of fresh vegetables and clean water. Syrah hesitated, then nodded. The visitors stayed for a while, sharing food and stories. Joe explained that the town still cared about them and wanted them to be safe. Syrah told them more about her world, the crash, and the dangers she had faced. She spoke of her hopes to find a place where her children could live without fear. Emily promised to help find such a place, a sanctuary where they could be safe and free. Over the following weeks, Emily worked with Joe and the town to create a plan. They contacted a special organization that helped refugees and others in need. The plan was to provide Syrah's family with a hidden, protected area where they could live openly but safely, without fear of being chased or hurt. The town prepared for the change. Some people were nervous, but many more were excited. They wanted to welcome Syrah and her children, to show them that kindness could build bridges, no matter how different someone might be. When the time came, Joe, Emily, and a few trusted helpers helped move Syrah's family to their new home. It was a beautiful secret place with a small garden, clean water, and plenty of space for the children to play and grow. The family slowly began to settle in, learning to trust humans more and more. They taught Joe and the town about their world, their culture, and their way of life. The children laughed and played, their strength growing every day. Syrah smiled more often, her eyes shining with hope. Joe often visited, sitting quietly with Syrah, sharing stories of Earth and listening to tales from faraway stars. The town of Cedar Hollow learned an important lesson. that fear and suspicion can be overcome by kindness and understanding. They had helped a family from another world, not as strangers or threats, but as neighbors and friends. The story of Syrah and her children became a symbol of hope and courage. It showed that no matter how different we may seem, we all share the same needs: love, safety, and the chance to live in peace. Joe looked at the stars each night, grateful that he had been part of something bigger than himself. He knew that somewhere out there, far beyond the earth, a family was thriving because of the kindness of a small town and the bravery of one man who chose to care. And so, the story ends not with fear or loss, but with hope, a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures begin when we open our hearts to the unknown.